My name is Samantha Stossel, and it's Saturday, October 6th, 2018. I'm conducting this interview at St. Andrews Village Retirement Community in Indiana, Pennsylvania, where Mr. Anderson resides. I am a student at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I am conducting this interview for a project that is a collaboration between the IUP Oral History Program and the Historical and Genealogical Society of Indiana County. We are collecting and analyzing interviews with longtime area residents about the community of Indiana. This collection is meant to complement work recently completed on the histories of some of the older buildings still standing in the town of Indiana. Our goal is to learn more about the community through people's experiences and memories. And so, Mr. Anderson, please begin by stating your full name and spelling it.
My name is Austin Parker Anderson, Jr.
And could you spell it
You
for
want me to spell it too?
Yes, I do.
Austin, Parker, Parker, Anderson, Jr.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you are comfortable sharing this information, could you tell me your birth date?
September 17th, 1931.
So, I think that makes you 87 years old, correct?
I think so, yes.
That's pretty impressive. All right, so first, I'd like to hear more about your childhood and family. You were born in Indiana, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. And so now I'd like to know more about your family. What were your parents' names?
Well, I'm a junior, so my father's name was Austin Anderson Sr. My mother's maiden name was Mary Longwell.
And did your parents move to Indiana, or were they both from the area?
My father was originally from Barnesboro, and my mother was born in Dixonville, I believe.
All right. And so what kinds of jobs did your parents have?
My father was in the shoe business most of his life. They were both graduates of Indiana, Pennsylvania, way back when it was Indiana Normal School or something. But they both went there.
Okay. All right. So I also understand that your father was a World War I veteran, right?
World War One?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. So do you think that your father's experience impacted you, either with how you thought about this time period or with how you experienced life after World War I?
Well, I'm sure it did.
Did your father talk a lot about his experiences?
No, not, well, yes and no. But, go ahead.
All right. And so your father didn't really talk about it, but you felt like it still impacted you. But did your mother ever talk about World War I?
No.
Okay. So during the 1930s, when you were born, it was only about 10 years before the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, giving women the right to vote. Was voting and political involvement important to your mother?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think it was because the 19th Amendment had been so recently passed? Or do you think it was something she was just interested in?
That's tough to answer because she voted all her life. I mean, as soon as she was able, as far as I know. And my mother and dad always voted.
Okay. So then moving on from your parents, you had a sister, right, Colleen?
That's right.
And so was she older or younger than you?
One thing you probably don't have in any of the records is I had a brother that died when he was about 4 years old, he was hit by a car on Water Street in Indiana when he was going to visit his grandmother across the street.
Oh my.
And he was killed
Could you
before I was born,
All right.
before my sister was born.
So he would have been the oldest then.
Pardon me?
So he would have been the oldest.
He would have been, I'm not sure I would have been. He was killed about 3 years before my sister was born, and she was 3 years older than me. So he would have been probably 6 years older than me approximately.
Okay, and what was his name?
Richard Dale Anderson.
Okay. All right. So, going back to your sister who was 3 years older than you, right?
Yes.
Could you describe her for me?
Describe her for you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were good friends. And she wrote a book once about growing up in Indiana, Pennsylvania on Water Street. And I think, as I recall, the book was never published, but she made many copies of it. And I think she called it Knee Deep in Love.
I really like that title. All right. Do you have any other relatives living close by?
Closest relative I have is my son, Chris, lives in Monroeville, Pennsylvania.
Okay. That's pretty close by. And
My other three sons live in Frederick, Maryland, and, well, actually it's Walkersville, Maryland, and Phoenix, Arizona.
Now, Phoenix is a long way away. And then, so you grew up in Indiana and
Yes.
on Water Street, right?
Well, actually, I was born in a hospital, but my first home, I think, was on Clymer Avenue.
Oh, really? And so, when do you think your family moved?
Pardon me?
So you talked about that your brother was killed on Water Street, right? So was your family living at Water Street for a while?
No, they
or-
lived-
Okay.
They lived on Clymer Avenue, was perpendicular to Water Street.
Oh, okay.
So it was about a block away from my grandfather's house, which was on Water Street, and Dickie was walking up Clymer Avenue and just crossing Water Street. Now, keep in mind that in those days there weren't many cars in the street. This would have been in 1929 or so.
So by the time you were young, did you notice a lot of cars in Indiana?
When I was young,
Mhm.
I didn't think about them one way or another, but
Okay.
no, there weren't a lot.
So were people still walking a lot or using horses or?
They were walking a lot. There were a lot of horses around. For example, we used to get milk sometimes with a horse, and ice we used to be delivered with a horse wagon.
All right, so you talked about your grandparents for a little bit. Do you remember anything about them?
Well, the only thing I remember is I don't really remember it, but they tell me that when I went to see my grandmother, I would always tell her, "Get the singing book, Grandma." And my grandfather and his brother, I think, lived with my aunt, who at that time lived up in 3rd Street in Indiana. But I only remember these two old gentlemen living up there, and nobody ever told me that he was my grandfather. Now that seems strange. That's a fact.
Okay, well that was very interesting. So, what grade school did you attend?
Pardon me?
What grade school did you attend?
What grade school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my kindergarten was in the, what is now the, I went to the Indiana Training School.
Oh, okay.
But at that time, the kindergarten was in, is it Euler Hall?
I believe, are you going for Keith?
I know where it is, but I don't know exactly what it was.
Okay.
But that's where I went to kindergarten.
Okay.
Then I went to the university school for first grade through 10th grade. Then I graduated in 10th grade and went to high school, Indiana High School, which I graduated from in 1949.
All right. So, do you remember anything in particular about either grade school or kindergarten or high school? Was there certain subjects that you especially liked?
The only thing I can remember much, I remember in 4th grade, we were, at that time, the university school was in Wilson Hall now, and that's still the name of, I think. And Keith Building had just been built. And we were in 4th grade, and we had to take all the stuff out of our desks and carry it down to Keith School. And on the way down there, I dropped my crayons. And everybody had to stop while I picked up my crayons. That was my first recollection of Keith School.
That was quite a big way to start school.
Yes.
Do you remember anything about your teachers?
Pardon me?
Do you remember anything about your teachers?
I remember everything about them.
Was it in a good way or a bad way?
Oh, good way generally. I liked them all.
So do you think that they really helped you realize that you wanted to keep on learning and possibly
yes.
go to a university?
Yes. I would say that the Keith School is a very good school.
All right. So when you were still fairly young, the country was going through the Great Depression. And the Great Depression, it impacted everyone differently. And could you tell me how it affected you and your family?
I don't think it affected us too much, really.
Okay.
I mean, I was too young to really understand what was going on. So I would say it didn't have a big effect, really.
Okay, so you don't think, did your father ever come home and you'd ever hear him talking maybe about his shoe store at that time?
Sure, all the time, but you change questions now.
Well, during the Great Depression, did you ever think that the Great Depression maybe impacted your father's store?
I'm sure it did. We didn't discuss it.
Okay. All right. And then, so, after that time, when you were a little bit older, so more when you were close to a teenager, World War II would have been underway.
Pardon me?
So when you were not quite in high school, but World War II would have started. What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember going to when I was in Key School. I liked Key School. I played on the basketball team. My wife was in Key School 2 years behind me, and I met her there. And what else can I tell you? We used to go to the county fair all the time, and used to have dances at Keith School, and she was a cheerleader there, and I don't know what else to tell you.
All right, so you don't think that, did having World War II going on at that time, do you think it really affected you at that time in your life?
The war?
Mm-hmm.
You mean the Second World War? I'll tell you, when the Second World War occurred, I was with my dad at the shoe store. It was on a Sunday, I think. And our dentist office was right across Main Street, and for some reason, our dentist was over in his office. And he came over to the store, which was closed, of course, and he said, the Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor. And my dad said, where in the world is Pearl Harbor? And I remember that. And that was a big change, very big change.
So do you remember how Indiana would have responded to the war? Was there a large movement to support the war, or was there mixed feelings?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, could you maybe tell me a little bit more about that?
Can I tell you more about that? Well, let's see. When we were young, they used to have paper drives, tin can drives, and there were quite often war bond not rallies, but parades or whatever to sell war bonds. And I remember my friend David Russell used to say, I'd like to go down to the junkyard sometime and see if some of the stuff that we still collected might still be there. And this was years later. But we collected, and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts were involved. And we used to go out and spot for airplanes and so on. So the community was very much involved, and there were a lot of young men that went to war.
All right. So I know we had mentioned your father's shoe store. Growing up now, do you remember going there and walking in and having your dad working with customers?
Oh yeah. First time I remember. Well, you're going back. You're getting into some other thing. Another thing I remember about Indiana was when I was quite young, and I don't remember exactly how old this was, but I'm not sure when it happened. The building where our shoe store was. Well, let me go back. My dad's shoe store opened originally when he first went into business at the corner of Philadelphia Street and Gompers Avenue, beside the Indiana Theater building, which later was a small room and later became the Diamond Drugstore for a while. And then the building where he moved to was across the street, across the old courthouse, what I call the old courthouse. And I think it was the Hetrick building, but I'm not sure. And it burned down in about 1937 or something like that. And I can remember as a kid standing in the lobby of the Indiana Theater out under the thing that overhangs the sidewalk and watching that building burn. And when the building was rebuilt as the Mac building, for some reason, I don't know how the property had changed hands or what, but the Mac building was built. And at that time it had Waxer's Men's Store on the eastern storeroom. There were three storerooms. And the Dean Phipps Auto Store was in the center, and my father's shoe store was on the western wing. That was at 614 Philadelphia Street, opposite the old courthouse.
All right. And so, just before we move on more with talking about the shoe store, I would like to know a little bit more about Indiana, especially Philadelphia Street, at that time when you were growing up and in high school. That where did you and your friends go after school? Was there certain...
Well, there were two theaters in Indiana, the Indiana Theater and the Manus Theater. And the Indiana Theater was between 6th and 7th Street on the north side of Philadelphia Street, and the Manus was between 5th and 6th Street on the south side of Indiana. And the Indiana Theater would have 3 movies a week. They would have Monday and Tuesday, Tuesday and Thursday, and Friday and Saturday. So three different films in a week. The Manus Theater would only have 3 shows a week: Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And the better pictures, or the more important pictures, or whatever you want to call them, were at the Manus Theater. Like, you would go to the Indiana and see things like Hopalong Cassidy and Flash Gordon, and once in a while a serial, and the Manus would have pictures like Lassie Come Home and Gone with the Wind and that kind of thing. There was very little color at that time, and every once in a while Bill Neff, who had a magic show and was nationally known as a good musician, and he had the Madhouse of Mystery, he called it. And he and Jimmy Stewart would now and again come back and put on an act together in the Manus Theater. And oftentimes it was a midnight show. And that was always very exciting for us kids.
Did you ever meet Jimmy Stewart?
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Jimmy Stewart was, he was a favorite son, of course. And I knew his father quite well. My Uncle Jake was a carpenter in Indiana, and he did a lot of business with Stewart's Hardware. And the Oscar that Jimmy Stewart won was always in the hardware store. And I forget what Jimmy Stewart won the Oscar for. The Oscar used to, occasionally it would be in the window, but it usually sat on the knife case, the case that had a whole display of knives. And that's usually where the Oscar was. And what else? What else do you want to know?
All right.
Another thing that probably, the most important thing that happened downtown probably, was when the Pennsylvania Railroad moved out of town. Did you know there was a railroad?
I have heard of that. Could you please tell me a little bit more?
Well, of course, it ended at Water Street. Well, it crossed Water Street and it delivered to the LaMantia fruit market and a couple of things on the north side of Water Street. But there was a whole freight yard between Water and Philadelphia Street at that time. And it crossed Water Street and went south through the university, which was not the university at that time. And along the university there was or along the railroad on the east side was a Moreau plant that built cement blocks, and it always would make a racket at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they were making. It had a chain thing that went up and down and took stuff up, and you could hear that in Keith School when that was going. It's kind of interesting. And then, of course, the railroad went clear out of town. Oh, and I also might mention, when I was a kid, the railroad would have they had the passenger station in between Water and Philadelphia Street. And they took a train, I don't know whether it was every year or not, but they would take the grade school kids to Idlewild down in Latrobe.
Well, that must have been fun.
That was fun. Mm-hmm.
Still a popular destination.
Yeah.
All right. I did notice that you mentioned downtown. Now, I have also heard people call it Uptown. Have you ever heard that before?
When I was a kid, we called it Uptown.
Okay. So...
Well, I need to tell you about Uptown because we lived at 946 Water Street, and my father always walked to the store every morning. And when I was very young, I was allowed to go uptown. It wasn't downtown then, it was uptown. And at that time there was a Woolworth 5 and 10 store between 7th and 8th Street. 8th Street didn't exist at that time. Well, 8th Street did, but 8th Street did not go across Philadelphia Street. Across Philadelphia Street on the south side, it was only an alley. But at that time, it was only up from 8th Street, only went up to Philadelphia Street. But anyway, I walked up to the Woolworth store when I was just a kid. I had 10 cents to spend. You know what I bought?
What?
Guess. For 10 cents.
For 10 cents? How old were you?
I don't know. But not very old. But about 3 Santa Clauses and a little wooden horse.
Well, that was quite a lot for 10 cents.
That was. And I still had those 3 horses, or 3 Santa Clauses, and I gave one to each of my sons.
Well, that was a very special gift.
And they still have them on their Christmas trees.
So would you say that's more of a modern thing to say downtown in Indiana?
Pardon me?
Would you say that's more of a modern thing to say downtown rather than uptown in Indiana?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So, when you would go uptown, I know you'd mentioned the theaters and some stores, but what else would your family do when they were uptown? Was there other stores that they would visit?
Oh, yeah. In the first place, Saturdays was very important because the miners, their payday was usually, I don't know whether it was always on Saturday or not, but that was a big night for business. And there were 2 5 and 10s. The Murphy store was on the north side of Philadelphia Street. And on Saturday night, the Salvation Army band would come and play in front of the Murphy store and put on a little program. and across the street, usually the popcorn wagon that was, I think, owned by I had the name in my mind a minute ago. Maybe Earl. I can't remember exactly. I'll think of it maybe later. It was always across the street. So on Saturday night you can come uptown and go to the movies, and the Salvation Army would be playing, and the streets would be crowded, very crowded.
So you had mentioned that Saturday was a time when all the miners would come into town, and were they from
Exactly.
the outlying areas like Ernest?
Yes.
Okay. And then, of course, a lot of people who lived in the borough would also be out Saturday night.
Yeah.
So it was a mixed crowd.
Yes.
And so, I think
probably in those days you didn't have the different malls in the different cities and so on. So people in the smaller towns would come to Indiana instead of going to Johnstown or somewhere else. So Indiana was kind of the main place to go on Saturday at that time.
All right. And did you ever visit any other bigger cities with your family when you were young? Did you ever go, for example, to Pittsburgh?
Yes, I had an uncle that lived in Johnstown, and we used to go there frequently. And we'd go to Pittsburgh often for the shoe shows. And I remember going to my dad once to New York City to a shoe show.
To a shoe show?
Yeah.
Could you explain those a little bit more?
A shoe show?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like any other kind of show, only they were showing shoes. The manufacturers would go and put on a shoe show, and it would be in several hotels, and they would display all their shoes, and you would buy them, some of them.
All right. And so as you got older, then you started thinking about you might want to go to a university, right?
Pardon me?
So then when you got a little bit older, you started to think about going to a university. Was
Yes.
Bucknell your top choice, or?
Well, I had a good friend that went to Bucknell, was at Bucknell at the time. He was 2 years ahead of me, and I guess he was probably a big factor in my going to Bucknell.
So your area of study was commerce and finance, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why did you choose that area of study?
Well, my father always wanted me to go into business, and although I worked for my uncle Jake Longwell, my mother's brother, who was a bachelor and always lived with my mother and father until he died. And I always liked to work with him much more than I liked to work in the store. But I figured I would rather spend my life working in something not as a carpenter, although I like carpenter work. And we built this furniture. We built that headboard. We bought that dresser behind you. We built the two nightstands on either side of the headboard. We also built a chest on chest. It's about as twice as tall as that dresser. and also built a big mirror. So I liked very much doing woodwork and so on.
It really is. It's beautiful furniture. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
So what do you remember about college?
Well, I was not a Joe College. I liked Bucknell very, very much. But I was not a very active member. I went out for freshman basketball. I played freshman basketball. That was back in the old days when it wasn't anything like basketball is today. And I was starting to date my wife at that time, and she came up to Bucknell for most of the dances and so on. And so I was not real active in Bucknell. I joined a fraternity, which was at the time a local fraternity. It was called Delta Upsilon, named after the Damascenian orator, or whatever his name was. Are you with me?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And I lived in the fraternity house, and I liked it very much. But my fraternity was one of the only fraternities in Bucknell that did not have a drinking problem. We had a rule that you could not have a keg of beer in the house. No drinking above, let me put it another way, no drinking below the second floor when we had a dance or anything. There was no drinking allowed downstairs. The drinking had to be all upstairs. I was not a drinker, so that suited me fine. And there were a lot of members in the fraternity were did not drink, and I'm losing track. How far do you want to go?
No, as long as you still have some thoughts on it, I will sit here and listen.
Well, I graduated from Bucknell in 1953. That year, our fraternity had won the intramural basketball trophy. We also had won the scholarship program, or the grade scholarship. And that's the only time that was ever done, as far as I know, by any fraternity at Bucknell. Shortly after in the meantime, the fraternity had changed from the Delta Upsilon, which was a local. It became national to the Delta Upsilon. And a couple of years after I graduated, the whole thing had changed, and I got kicked off the campus for whatever. So I used to hitchhike from back and forth from Lewisburg, Pennsylvania
Really?
to Indiana, yeah.
About how many hours would that take?
Well, I guess it was about a 2-hour drive, but it would take a while, 3 hours probably.
Well, that's very interesting. An interesting way to get around. So when you would come back between Lewisburg and Indiana, did you notice a lot of differences between the two communities?
Well, to come back from Lewisburg to Indiana, you'd have to come through State College. So you're asking me, was there differences?
Did you notice was Indiana a really different community from what was around the university at Bucknell, or do you think they're pretty similar? Or Indiana is more of kind of focused on the mining communities. Do you think Lewisburg was different or similar to Indiana as a town?
Well, Lewisburg was a smaller town than Indiana. And
Call from
that's my answering machine. We'll let that go.
All right.
It's going to ring 6 times, I think,
Townsend.
and then I'll get some kind of message.
That's okay. I am prepared.
You are.
Townsend.
Okay. I'm just going to turn that off.
Townsend. Med.
I guess I can't. I knew there was something. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. It makes it more interesting when something always goes off. All right. So when you graduated in 1953, right?
Right, but I graduated in February.
In February, okay.
I went to IUP one summer and took some extra courses so that I could, at the time the draft was taking a lot of kids out of school. So I went to IUP in the summer and took a couple of courses. I took history and a couple other things, and to keep from getting drafted. So I graduated in February.
Okay. So it took you a little less than 4 years to graduate, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So then, when you graduated, what was the first thing you did?
Well, of course, I was in line to be drafted, and I didn't want to be drafted, so I decided to go to officers candidate school in the Navy, and decided to join the Navy, and I went to officers candidate school in Newport, Rhode Island. And at the same time, there were 3 other fraternity brothers of mine that went to OCS at the same time as I did.
So could you tell me a little bit about the officers candidate school?
Well, it was 4 months, and it was very interesting and very good, and I liked it very much. And we were divided into companies. I happened to be in company 4. There was also a company that was a supply company that was taught different things, and of course we were on enlisted men. We were officer candidates, but we were only seamen. Seamen. We wore white hats and navy blues. As a matter of fact, when we graduated from OCS, we went past the one of the other houses that had just sailors in it, and we were all dressed at that time in our officers' uniforms. I remember some guy on the porch says, "Holy mackerel, there ain't going to be any enlisted men left," because he saw the whole OCS group. I thought that was funny.
And so then after you graduated from the officers candidate school, Then where did you go from there?
Well, we had a choice to where we wanted to go, what we would like to do. And I said I wanted to go to sea because I wanted to, that was something that I was interested in. I thought that would be a good thing to do. And I thought, I didn't request, I don't think I requested the Battleship Missouri as such, but I said I'd like to be on a big ship. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but that's where I got assigned, was to the USS Missouri.
So could you tell me a little bit about the USS Missouri?
Did you Google that while you were at it?
I did, but I would like to hear it from you.
Okay, first of all, let me say this. I did not go on the Missouri while it was involved in World War II. I helped to decommission the Missouri to go out of commission after World War II. Then it was recommissioned to go back to Korea. And when it came home from the Korean War is when I went aboard. In the meantime, of course, World War II had been over, and on the Missouri, on the second deck, which was the O1 level above the main deck, the decks of a battleship or any other ship in the Navy are numbered O1, O2, O3, O4, as high as they go. And Missouri went up 11 decks and down 5 decks. So the surrender deck in the Missouri, where the Second World War was ended, was on the O1 level, which was 1 deck above the main deck, And there's now a plaque, a brass plaque, big plaque, as big as your bed, probably 10 feet in diameter, and it says, over this spot, on September the 2nd, 1945, the formal instrument of Japan to the Allied powers was signed, thus bringing to a close the Second World War. The ship was at that time anchored in Tokyo Bay.
That's impressive that you have it memorized.
Well, my job when I went on to Missouri was to help. I was a junior assistant at Turret 1, and the plaque happened to be one of our responsibilities, so I got to see it every morning.
All right, I'm going to take 1 second here. I noticed that your messages on your phone is still beeping.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'll wait and listen to it later.
All right. Eventually, will it turn off or?
It'll stay on. It'll be there on there.
All right. Does the beeping eventually stop?
Pardon me?
Does the beeping eventually stop?
Do you hear the beeping? I can't stop the beeping unless I listen to the message, but I don't have any idea who it is.
Okay, I tell you what, how
Wait a
about
minute.
if I just take one of your Afghans and I'll just throw it over it?
That's it. There. Set that up in front of it and see how that works. that okay? That works better. Oh boy, this high-tech world.
I know. It's hard to get away from it all. All right. So, I believe it was when you were in the Navy that you got married to your wife, correct?
I went on my honeymoon by myself. And the Missouri went to France, or first to Portugal, and then to France, and then came home. I took leave to come home to get married. And so I got married while I was in the Navy.
And so your wife's name was Donna Orr, I believe, right?
Right. My wife's name was Donna Orr.
Could you tell me a little bit about her?
Well, as I said, she went to from IUP, and she graduated in '55 in home economics, and we have 3 sons. And while we were married, and our three sons were growing up, we went to 45 national parks and camped, or we didn't camp. We never owned a camper, but we would rent a camper. Would make Donna always made the plans where she'd like to go, and so we would call the first place we was we wanted to go to Yellowstone. So we called Billings, Montana, and we said, what do you have in Billings that we can rent a camper? And we would rent a camper for a week or two and travel around the area and then come home. So we camped in 45 different national parks, but never owned a camper of our own. And later on we started camping in tents. That's it in a nutshell. But my wife decided when she was growing up that she taught for a little while, but not very long. And she decided that she would rather stay home and raise the boys.
Could you tell me your 3 sons' names?
My son's 3 names. Chris is the oldest.
Okay.
He's the one that lives in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. My middle son's name is David. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona. And my youngest son is Stephen. He lives in Walkersville, Maryland. Chris he works for an actuary firm in Pittsburgh. David is a retired elementary school principal from Arizona. My son Stephen is a minister in Walkersville. Actually, it's very close to, Frederick, Maryland.
I'm going to take 1 minute here, and I'm just going to see if you can hit OK on your phone that you know there's a message, because I can still hear the beeping underneath the pillow, and I want to make sure we get a good audio.
Okay. You want to turn this off? What do you want to do?
I'm just going to hit play, and before it starts playing, I'm going to hit stop. Would that be okay?
I'm not sure, but go ahead.
You have 1.
There we go. I didn't hit delete, so you still have your message.
Pardon me?
I didn't hit delete or anything, so you still have your message. All right.
You know more about that than I do because like I said, this buttons drive me nuts. I just wait until you're 50 years old. See what the world was like then. What kind of buttons they have now. Or then.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
You remember that I said that?
All right, where were we? So, coming to the time when you were the owner of Anderson's Shoe Store, could you tell me what year did you leave the Navy?
I was in the Navy about 3.5 years.
Okay.
I came up at Christmas time from, the ship was at that time in Bremerton. I decommissioned the Missouri again after the Korean War. I was on the Missouri when it was decommissioned, and it is now in Pearl Harbor, where it's a museum, and you can go when you visit Pearl Harbor now. So the Missouri is there when the war was ended, and the Arizona is still there, and it's sunk. And you can see the Arizona from the Missouri, or vice versa. And so you have the beginning of World War II and the end of World War II at Pearl Harbor. And when you go to Hawaii, you can see it.
Did you ever visit the Missouri in Hawaii?
Yes, I did. And I knew more about it than the tour guide.
I'm not surprised. So did you stay on the Missouri for your full 3.5 years in the Navy, or did you?
No, I was transferred, or we put Missouri out of commission, and I was served the rest of my tour in the Navy on SAC Lance NATO staff in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay. All right. So did Donna go and live with you then?
Oh yes, the honeymoon that we missed while I went to France and Portugal on the Missouri, we spent a honeymoon in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We lived at Virginia Beach while I went to my job in the SAC Lance staff in Norfolk.
Well, you know, they say Virginia is for lovers.
Pardon me?
They say Virginia is for lovers.
Virginia, we had a grand time. Chris was born while we lived in Virginia.
Okay, so he
As
was.
a matter of fact, he was, this is interesting, but it doesn't mean anything. But the doctor that delivered Chris was, at the time he was a lieutenant, I think, but his name was Lieutenant Kirk, which at the time, you know who Kirk was? Were you familiar with the TV show that was very famous later with the Enterprise and okay, that was who delivered Chris. And Chris was a great fan of the Enterprise. And I said, you can always tell people that you were born by Captain Kirk. But he wasn't captain at the time. He was only a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how much it cost? Guess. $4.25. Biggest bargain I ever got. Okay.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add about Virginia or your experiences in the Navy?
Not really.
Okay. All right. So then you.
I might say my other statement. There's another gentleman that lives here in St. Andrews who also served at the same time and was also at the surrender of the Missouri. He was on the Ticonderoga, and that was it was anchored near the Missouri. The Ticonderoga was an aircraft carrier, and he was in a position that he could see the surrender taking place, although he was on a different ship, and I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember his name?
Pardon me?
Do you remember his name?
Yeah, I do and I don't.
That's okay. We'll get
Pardon?
it later.
I'll get it. I'll
Yeah.
get it. Go ahead. I don't have it here.
Okay. So then, when you left the Navy, you came back to Indiana, right?
Right.
And then your father retired,
Mm-hmm.
and you took over the shoe store.
Well, my sister's husband, Clyde McAllister, and I went into business with my sister, and we took over the store and ran it for 5 years. And then Clyde and my sister decided that they wanted to move back to California. So I took it over, and Donna and I ran it for the next 50 years or so until we went out of business in 1949.
So you had mentioned your dad really wanted you to go into the shoe store, right?
Yeah.
So when you came back and took over the shoe store, did you notice that a lot of your father's customers stayed and became your customers too?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the customers that I had when we went out of business had been originally my dad's customers.
Wow. So those are longtime customers. And then did you notice that with your dad's customers, then the second generation started coming too?
Oh, yes. Matter of fact, one of the customers that I remember works here at St. Andrews, and she came into our store when she was just a kid. She had 9 brothers, I think, or 9. She was one of 10 children in the family. And her mother used to come in the store. They lived on a farm, and her mother used to bring produce in season to see if there was anything that we wanted to buy.
Do you remember anything else about any of your other customers?
Well, I don't want to start, because a lot of the customers, they were all my friends, really.
Okay.
They were more than customers, they were friends.
But so you did become very close with your customers over the years then?
Pardon me?
So you did become very close with your
Oh,
customers
yes.
over the years?
Sure.
Okay. Could you maybe describe to me a typical day at the shoe store when you and your wife owned it?
Say that again?
Could you maybe describe just a typical day at the shoe store when you and your wife owned it?
Well, we lived on Poplar Avenue, and I usually rode my bike to work. And I had a motor scooter later on, and I would ride my motor scooter to work, but my bicycle mostly. And we opened at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the, the Downtown Business Association always two things we always argued, or not argued about, but discussed was store hours and parking. So the stores were open at first always on Saturday night. And then for a while we were open on Monday nights. And it just changed over the years. And I don't know what else. And we always closed at 5 o'clock, except for the night that we were open, and whether it was Monday night or Friday night or Saturday night or whatever. But Monday night was the original. Saturday night was the original opening night. And a regular day would be we'd have to trim the windows. We had Donna did the window trimming, and she got the ideas. She would buy things to put in the window to display the shoes on. She would decorate inside the store, and that part of it. And that was what she liked to do. She was not involved in the bookwork or anything like that. She didn't like that. But we had a lot of charge accounts, and when we started out, there weren't anything such as MasterCards or any kind of charge cards. But we had charge cards when they came available.
So you owned Anderson Shoe Store for a very long time. From when you started, from when the time when you took over the business and then when you retired, what major changes did you notice, either with Indiana itself, Philadelphia Street?
Well, there are a lot of changes. The first, and I don't know that I can give you this in the right order. The big change probably was when the railroad moved out, and with it went Stewart's Hardware, which was on right next to the railroad, and that's where the Savings and Trust Bank built their new bank. As a matter of fact, they have a plaque on in their front yard that says, "This is a former site of the old Jimmy Stewart Hardware," or something like that. That was probably in other words, that whole project was done with an urban renewal project. And that was probably the biggest change that took place. The courthouse was built the new courthouse was built at that time. And the bank, Savings Trust, old bank, bought the old courthouse. So that was probably the biggest change.
Then also over that time, I know mining would have went from pretty much the most major industry in Indiana to almost non-existent. Did you notice a lot of changes in your shoe store, like to the Saturday night? Is that
Oh yeah, changed totally. Well, I won't say totally, but a great deal.
And then, so you went to Bucknell, but as you had said, you went to grade school through what we now know as IUP, and then your wife would have gone to IUP. Over the years, did you notice Was there a time when IUP became more prominent in the community, or was it always something that was there?
Well, it was always there. I will say this, I think the biggest change, if you speak about Indiana City, not downtown, but downtown Indiana, I can remember sitting in the store talking to Elwood Sheeter, I think he was Dean of Men at one time. I believe that's who it was. And I told him, I said, the students in Indiana University living in Indiana Borough has changed the town more than anything that has happened.
Could you tell me in what ways?
Many ways. The students moved into neighborhoods that destroyed a neighborhood. There were two things that a kid always brought to college at that time. Was a car, not a car, but a cell phone, and the parties. And there's no way that you can put a college group in a residential neighborhood. There's no way that it can happen and have it be comfortable for the people that live there first. It either turns into a commercial or a fraternity neighborhood, and that's kind of sad. And I remember telling Elwood Sheeter at the time, I said, why don't you have these kids live at the university? At that time, there was no, all the dorms that were out there were not there at the time. And I'd like to take you as a young college student and take you and a couple of students that students had lived in when they went to college. They were literally destroyed, and I mean that. Not a lot of my friends, but several friends owned student rentals, and they were nothing but trouble.
So do you think in general...
But let me say, the university has been great for the town. There's no argument there. The other side of the university, the athletics, the football teams, the basketball teams, and so on, and the things that the university provide, especially the plays and so on, you can't replace that for anything.
So taking the good and bad together, do you think IUP is more on the good side for Indiana, or is it kind of in the middle?
Oh, it has to be the good thing. There's no question about it, because the university had no control over the students when they lived off campus. I can remember telling Elwood, I said, why don't you make these kids behave themselves? He said, we can't. That's not the law.
All right.
But all in all, the university is, no question, wonderful for Indiana. No question. Don't let me mislead you. I'm awfully glad it's here.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice to know, though, hearing from people who have lived here for many, many years, of how they see university both as a good and bad presence, because everything has a good side and a bad side, and
Absolutely.
we can only really see how things are if we look honestly at both sides of an issue or an institution. And so, I think we have covered many, many things, and I would say, really, is there anything that you would like to say about any topic? Is there something that you wish I had asked about?
Let me see what I did write down. It was in 1949 that I formed a partnership with my sister. That was on July 31st of 1959. I started working for my dad in 1956. Oh, the other big thing that happened downtown was the parking garage. I was on the parking authority at the time, and the parking garage opened in 1976. In 1979, the Indiana Mall opened up, and that was a big discussion, of course, with the merchants downtown. What's it going to do to downtown? Well, interesting enough, the downtown's still there. The mall is closed, more or less. And as I said, we had two 5 and 10s. In 1982, the Murphy 5 and 10 closed. And in 1985, the Atrium, which took place in the old Murphy's building, it opened. And in 1987, Brody's, which was one of the major department stores in Indiana, if not the major department store, closed. And we had the downtown sidewalk revitalization in 1989 when they put in new sidewalks and some new lighting and so on, and that was very important. And then in 1931, we closed our store. After 64 years, the store had been in business.
What was the year again?
The other thing I might mention, we went out of business in 1990.
Okay, 1990.
And we went out of business before. We didn't have it. I don't know whether some of the other stores may have had it, but we didn't have any barcodes. You know what I mean by barcode?
Mm-hmm.
When you go in the store and they zip, 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 we didn't have those.
Really?
But as a matter of fact, Troutman's had two different stores in Indiana. The first was on the corner of Philadelphia Street, on the south side of Philadelphia Street, which now is on the corner of 8th Street, but it wasn't 8th Street at that time. It was just an alley. And they had a system of wires going from the main floor up to the office, which was on the second floor. And they had a little car that they would put the money and the slips in and pull a lever, and these cars would get sent by a spring somehow up to the second floor. and they would record it, make the change, and send it back down. And that was the thing at that time. I think it was the only store in town that had that.
So it was a very unique experience.
I don't know, your mom wouldn't remember that, I don't suppose. But that's just an example of how things have changed. Anything else? I think that's all I had on my list that I was
Alright.
going to tell you. Well, the other thing that happened over the years, I told you about the two movies and the different movies that they would have. There were fires downtown. The first fire, well, I told you, but I don't remember whether we talked about it or not. When I was just a kid, that the Hatcher burned down before the Mac building was built. And Steiner's Market was downtown and it burned down. The Waxler building was between 7th and 8th Street. It burned down. And the King Leather Factory, was that ever mentioned in your history somewhere?
No, I don't believe I ran
Well, it
across
wasn't
that.
downtown exactly. But the King Leather Factory was on 9th Street. Between Water and Oak Street.
Okay.
Well, it was not on 9th Street. It actually was on the alley behind it. And they manufactured wallets and purses and stuff like that. And they had a big fire, destroyed the plant. And I think they had some kind of a business in South 6th Street for a while, up on the second or third floor of the apartments that are now down there. I'm not sure about that exactly. And the Classroom Restaurant replaced the Capitol Restaurant, which had been in downtown forever. And the and then as we talked about the Pennsylvania Railroad when they moved out, and the Indiana Gazette moved from, it used to be on the main street, and it moved to Water Street. And we one time had at least 4 hardware stores downtown, and they all went out of business. There was Barclays, Mabin's. Mabin's was not on the main street, but it was on North 6th Street. And the Indiana Hardware on Main Street, Peterson's, and the Indiana Hardware. So there were at least 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 15 hardware stores. At one time, I think there were 13 or more shoe stores. And there were a lot more shoes being sold in more than 13 stores, because Brody's and Troutman's and Montgomery Ward's and all these other stores also sold shoes. Other stores also sold hardware, like Sears sold hardware and Stewart's Hardware sold hardware, but nothing was bought online.
So there was still a very big demand for shoes then, even though there was quite a few shoe stores.
Well, there used to be 700 shoe factories in the United States. Now I don't think there's half a dozen.
All right. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right. No final thoughts?
Pardon me?
No final thoughts?
Well, I've oftentimes told my kids or my grandkids, it'll be interesting when you kids get older, you look back and see what things were like when you were a kid, and think back what they're like now. And that's the stage I'm in right now. I'm looking back, and there is so much that's changed, and I can't imagine what's going to happen in the future.
Well, it would be very interesting to see, and I think that's a very good way to end the interview. So thank you very much for all your time. I really
Samantha,
appreciate
thank you
it.
very much. I really enjoyed it. I was looking forward to it.
The feeling was mutual. I was really looking forward to it too.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.